Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
This is a big deal for countries like yours, and you represent a lot of the frontline countries. You, in Barbados, if I'm not mistaken, have less than a percentage point of emissions.
That's right.
And yet you say that you are on the front lines of the impact of everybody else's pollution. What exactly do you mean by that? What does it look like?
To begin with, we have a serious problem with water. We have effectively drought-like conditions for the better part of the last few years, where almost as half of the island is at risk of getting adequate water. Secondly, we have an impact with respect to our coral reefs. A lot of the marine life that we saw as children are no longer there. Thirdly, we have the possibility of, and we're seeing it already, of saltwater intrusion into some of our aquifers, making the water situation more dire. And then we have the sargassum seaweed as well on the east coast and of most of our countries, from the very south in the region to the Gulf of Mexico. And this affects people who have restaurants or hotels or whatever, because the smell is toxic.
And that's because of the
That's because of the climate, that's right. And
of
then,
the water.
And you have not heard me say floods or hurricanes. And those are the other ones as well. This year, Barbados had its first hurricane in 66 years, and before that, we had a freak storm for 90 minutes that had 46,000 lightning strikes in 90 minutes.
Prime Minister, do you find it difficult to convince the people who you need to convince that this is all due to climate change?
I think people are getting there. The problem is that those who need to make the decisions are kicking the can down the road, and they believe that they can because they're not seeing us. They see themselves. And for them, they don't reach that period of peril probably for another 15, 20 years. I mean, you heard this morning 4 degrees to Shanghai and Miami to be eradicated. Well, it's 1.5 and 2 for us. So there are a lot of us that are going to be affected before Shanghai and Miami.
You gave a rip-roaring speech to the plenary.
Thank you.
And you noticed that China is not there, Russia is not there. Russia is a 5% polluter, but China is the biggest, and of course America second biggest. What was your message with your speech?
Well, if I had more time, I would have said code red to China, to the US, to Europe, to India, to all of the countries who are not just the traditional emitters, but also the new ones. Part of the difficulty is that the new emitters argue that the traditional emitters have the largest stock. But whether it is the largest stock or the smallest stock, we are literally like the ground when elephants fight, we get trampled. And that's exactly what's happening now. So we really hope that the message will go forth. And that's why I said that I hope that their populations, their people, will tell them that they need to act now and not later.
So do you think, actually, I've asked quite a few of the leaders, surely the populations around the world, which are putting pressure on their leaders all over, should make them sit up and listen?
That's right.
But they don't seem to be as much as you say they need to.
Well, perhaps because, as I said, they're waiting for it to hit them. Right. And we really are hoping that a conscience will be pricked and that they'll recognize that no one is safe until everyone is safe. And if the episode with vaccines hasn't shown us that, then we will never learn. So in my country, we have a saying, hard ears you won't hear, own way you're going to feel. In other words, those who don't listen will ultimately pay the price.
So, you talk about the vaccine, and I just wonder, your very large northern neighbor, the United States of America, has, a bit of a problem with conspiracy theories, whether it's about vaccines, whether it's about climate denial, obviously the political tribalism. I wonder what you think in the Caribbean, accepting many American tourists, and, you're just very close. The most popular, the highest viewed cable television program is Tucker Carlson's on Fox News, and he is going around the world trying to tell his viewers of the dangers of mitigating climate change. In other words, saying that things like wind turbines and others are actually themselves vehicles of death and destruction, and that they are elitist and that they hurt the poor the most. I guess my question is, what is your reaction to that, and how do you mitigate that kind of story? How do you convince people of actually the other side?
Well, there's a journalist that I know that made a statement a couple of years ago about the importance of truth. I think you know her. Her name was Christiane Amanpour. And the bottom line is that's where we are. That regrettably we live in a world now where there's no arbiter of truth or fake news. And as a result, we get that kind of dangerous activity influencing and impacting on people and costing lives, as it has with the vaccines. It's going to cost lives with the climate as well. And we need to make sure that those of us who can defend truth literally work with those who are the purveyors of our messages, whether it is the Facebooks or whether it is the other big tech companies or the news companies. There has now to be a morality, and that's what I keep calling for. Last time we spoke, I talked about moral strategic leadership that is global, and that's what I mean by it. And unless we call out people who are literally misleading others, then it's going to cost lives.
One of the things this summit might achieve is upping the amount of money the rich countries give to those who are not so rich to mitigate climate. We heard from Ursula von der Leyen just now about, you know, what the world needs to do to step up its pledges. Tell me what you think, because even Alok Sharma, who's the president of this COP, being the British official in charge, says that that's not even enough, the $100 billion a year.
And he's absolutely correct. And the truth is the $100 billion is the floor, and we've missed that floor, which is why I keep saying that we need to mind the gap, just like the trains tell us to mind the gap, mind the gap. If we don't, we're going to see the consequences. Just now I said, look, the world has spent $25 trillion since 2008 through printing of money, quantitative easing, of which $9 trillion has come in the last 18 months. If we can get the world to set aside $500 billion a year, not in cash, but in their special drawing rights from the IMF, and do that for 20 years, we can create a trust that can help those countries between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, because regrettably, it's not only small island developing states that are affected now, it's all of those countries in there.
So let me ask you, we've just seen this report from Fred Pleitkin talking about the plight of the Senegalese in terms of climate change, the seas, the fact that it's, you know, cutting into fishing and jobs, and being a push factor to migration. And of course, migration is another great, big, contentious topic around the world. What are your concerns about climate-forced migration?
Well, clearly the North Atlantic countries and the countries of the world want migration, because that's the natural consequence of their not reaching agreements in this meeting. You're going to have all of these countries that are affected. We just heard the young lady from Kenya say 2 million Kenyans are at risk of hunger. We've heard our pleas across small island developing states. And the truth is that we know that there's the possibility of failed societies or societies that have to be evacuated. We saw it with Montserrat, with the eruption of the volcano. We saw it with Barbuda, with Hurricane Maria. So that if we don't accept that it has happened, can happen, and will happen, then we will see the migration. And then those who are uncomfortable with migration will have to accept that it is the consequences of their failure to act, regrettably.
So let me ask...
That sounds all academic, because at the end of the day...
No, it doesn't sound academic. We're seeing migration right now.
And it's families who really don't want to leave their homes.
Right.
And that's the tragedy of it.
Every politician has their problem. That is, yeah, we want to do the best, but what about our, I don't know, coal workers? What about our, etc.? What about your tourism industry?
Exactly.
Your nation depends very heavily on long-haul flight tourism. That is a huge problem when it comes to polluting our atmosphere.
That's why we need the scientific research to see how best we can move both planes and cruise ships and not rely only on fossil fuels for their movement and propulsion. I believe that if we can solve male baldness, if we can do all these other things in the world, it's true, then I believe we can solve the problems of how to fuel the movement of people across the world in planes and in ships. But we have not put our minds to it.
Just finally, if the leaders of Russia, or most especially China, were here, and the leader of India is, what would you say to them right now?
That we're in this together, and that if you haven't learned from the pandemic that all of us are suffering, then you will not learn from anything. And we need to move together. Even if we slow down a little bit, we need to move together. Thank you.